Thank you for having me. Thank you for bringing the film to the festival.
Now, Dawn, a Charleston legend, is going to be part of our BIPOC shorts program. Tell me about how this documentary about a British trans woman overlaps into BIPOC concerns.
So Dawn Langley Simmons and her story fall into this category because not only was she a trans pioneer, she was a pioneer, and she was, I believe, at least that's what it stated, the first interracial marriage in South Carolina. So she was a pioneer with interracial marriage. And it's something that's going on today. I mean, there's trans issues today, and there's, African American issues today. So she is more relevant, almost, or as relevant today as she was back then.
Your documentary deals with class, race, gender, the geography of being in the South in the 60s. Tell me how you came to this story.
I read a book about Dawn Langley Simmons about 25 years ago called The Peninsula of Lies. And at the time, this particular research author went out to find out all the inconsistencies and all the lies in her stories that she had to tell in that time and era to survive. And he, in this era, really made her out to be a villain. And I read the book and thought, this is such a mistake. This is so off kilter. There's a real person behind this who had to do what she did because of a lot of different reasons. And the story stayed with me. I was a beginning filmmaker. I wasn't ready to make that film. And when I was 20 years later, it was just the right time and the right place. And I happened to find, her daughter, Natasha. And it just really was, I think it was meant to be. I mean, when you stick with something for 20 years, it's meant to be.
One of the things that jumped out at me is that you have this voice of white male cisgender privilege running throughout the documentary in the figure of various interviewers who are trying to spin much less outrageously than the Peninsula of Lies did, but trying to spin these interviews with her and comment on them as they're asking her questions. What did that juncture of those two perspectives bring to your film with those clips?
Well, I think it definitely brought you into that era immediately because of the questions and because of the way that they asked them. And to be perfectly honest, I thought they were rather respectful for the time.
Yeah.
It could have been a lot worse. They didn't make fun of her. They just had legitimate questions, and they asked them in a 1960s way,
right,
with not understanding anything. So I thought they really transported you to a time in an era, and it was not offensive, and we didn't have to cut anything out. We didn't edit around, talk that was ill of Dawn or anything like that. We used everything, even when she used the N-word. We used that in the film because that was, how you spoke in that era. That's what happened to her. That's what she was called.
Okay. Well, welcome. We're in process in recording, so just jump on in. Introduce yourself if you would, and tell us a little bit about Rebound.
But I'm Snore Doumbia, DP and producer of Rebound, the short film about kind of budding love, I guess you could say.
And at this point, I should point out to both of you that at this point, the audience will have seen the films. So we were looking to give them a little bit of perspective. So Snore, tell me a little bit about how this film came about.
So when me and Moon were in college, actually, they had started writing this piece and wanted it to kind of embody just a lesbian story that was kind of a reflection of like we see in the film, like the jocks always like get what they want and all of that, and we kind of wanted to show them not getting that, and kind of showing, if you've seen the film Love and Basketball, kind of doing it from a different perspective.
The couple in the film is biracial. I was just talking with Ron about having a voice in his documentary of a cis straight male sort of commenting on his documentary is about a trans woman in the South. And we get the same thing with Marcus in your film. We get a straight guy commenting on this relationship. What do you think Marcus brings to the film?
So Marcus, we wanted him to be everything that he was, being an athletic black male, because we wanted him to portray that, like I said, the jock style, but then we also wanted him to portray that hyper masculinity that we often see in black men. And Marcus is kind of, I guess, just a physical manifestation of masculinity and showing the, like, not even necessarily the toxicity, but when you're in that, like, you're a jock and you're that stereotype of being that person, like, we're kind of showing the way that stereotype.
Ron, that brings me back to your film in terms of her husband. There's this representation of a typical straight male in this relationship. Tell me about what you knew, what you learned, what you found about him.
You know, I don't know that I would consider him the typical straight male.
Okay.
From the 1960s. And the reason is that he met Dawn when Dawn was Gordon and had a relationship for several years with Dawn, helped Dawn through her transition. So I think they ultimately had a more stereotypical marriage once she had transitioned. But I wouldn't say that he was, you know, traditional. You know, we only know from the sister that he was bisexual.
Tell me about the element of fantasy and how you balanced humor with, you know, the realities of a lesbian couple, of an interracial couple.
So for me, I've actually played a big role in this in regards to Rebound, just because I was very heavily focused on us differentiating the reality versus the fantasy aspects of Rebound. And kind of the fantasy being that we're really focused on the fantasy is showing that love and the all-inclusiveness of these two people's romance towards one another, and kind of the lack of judgment they're receiving from any potential outside factors. And then in kind of reality, kind of feeling a sense of always being perceived and always being judged. And so it's kind of harsher. We're colder when we're in the real world, and then obviously like warmer and softer when we're in the fantasy.
Right. Those fantasy scenes are hysterical. That both actresses did a marvelous job. Ron, we were talking a little bit before the cameras rolled about where Dawn might have been in terms of fantasy versus reality, and the stories she was spinning and whether or not she believed them. Talk to me a little bit about that.
You know, we talked a little bit. There's a lot of examples that were not in the film of stories and fables about her life. And I don't know her. I never met her. I don't know. There was no one that really knew her except her daughter that was still alive. I can't believe, because Dawn was very smart. She's a smart cookie. And I believe that she said and made up stories that she needed to survive. Mm-hmm. And I think I don't know that she necessarily believed them, but she embodied them completely to sell them. And that's sort of my take on Dawn, because I really liked her and I really respected her. And I think I might have gone even more overboard than she did in that era. You know, I mean, she chose to live in a really horrible place for a transgender woman. you know, in the 1960s who was married to a black man.
Right, right. But you know, you point out in the film this sequence where she tries to embody being a pregnant woman in order to create a scenario where her child will make sense in that culture.
And she held on to that till the day she died. She told her daughter she was her natural born daughter. She never wavered from that, ever. And I mean, since she was smart, there's no way she believed it. But for whatever her reasons were, and I wish she were still alive so that we could have talked to her to figure out what what her thought processes was and why you would hold it for 30 years at the time is what it was. And maybe, you know what, I didn't grow up back, in the 30s, in the 20s. So I can't even imagine. I think I could imagine, but I can't, what it was like to live through her life and what she had to do to get through it. And the way she had to, conceal it for a lifetime. We don't have to do that anymore. People, it's very different. And so I don't think we can imagine it.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's where the overlap with these two films comes in nicely, is that you're dealing with, 50, 70 years apart, depending on what part of Dawn's story we're talking about. But there is still that conflict of having an authentic life, having an authentic relationship. Snore, I don't know if this is a fair question, but do your two characters, do they make it? Do they end up having something that lasts beyond that moment?
I think it's fair to say that they experiment, and the experiment works. I say that they try it out. They've kind of discovered for themselves who they want to be and kind of fit into themselves. We see in the end of the film, they've both decided to kind of take away their facades and fall into who they really want to be. And so I think they take that with them and they carry on together.
A bit of hope. If you could both, just before we go, I know we're going to lose Ron in a minute here, but tell me about the future of these projects in terms of distribution, in terms of folks either recommending this to people to see or being able to access down the road.
I'll start with Dawn. And short films are really difficult to find homes for. Especially one, had I known that 40 minutes was the magic number for Amazon and Apple TV, I would have stretched Dawn from 34 minutes, because I tend to make films and they tell you how long they should be. And that's how you decide. But I easily could have squeezed out 6 more minutes of Dawn's life. So it's on IndieFlix. Film Hub is putting it out, and I think I forget the names of a lot of these smaller streaming services, the ad supported. So it can be found. It's out there on YouTube as well, the YouTube video channel. So it's it has potential to have a bigger reach. And I don't have the names of all the places, but I think if you Google it, you can find it for sure.
Okay, thank you. Snore?
Yeah, for Rebound, it's not available fully yet. We're still kind of going through the festival circuit and trying to get as many eyes on it as we can get, and bringing it back to Chicago and doing some kind of local showings and events. But we plan to eventually get it out on such platforms like that. And I think we had our eyes kind of set on Vimeo as well. Yeah, sure. It is hard to find a resting home for short films that kind of like ours, and so we're still figuring out where we're gonna lay it to rest after the festival market.
We need to find a metaphor besides lay it to rest. It's
yeah.
Give it a good home, adopt it, love it.
Yeah.
And actually, for Dawn, one of the reasons I made this film is because I do features. But I knew this wasn't going to be a moneymaker, but I wanted to do it as a proof of story concept, because I believe that Dawn really should have a feature or a limited series about her life. She's an inspiration. She's a trailblazer, and her life is just beyond fascinating. You couldn't make it up. I mean,
no,
really,
if this were fiction, you would probably put it aside as being just too
you wouldn't believe it.
Yeah.
So I'm using it as a ticket into, to getting a screenwriter and a feature and moving it that way. And that's why I did it, because it's one thing to read a book, it's one thing to pitch a story, but to actually visualize it in 35 minutes and hear it in her own voice, that was the purpose of it.
Mm. Well done, both of you. Thank you so much for joining me. Best of luck with finding loving homes for your films.